It's September 23rd, 1779. Two ships, the Serapis and the Bonamy Richard, are stuck together with grappling hooks. Thousands of spectators gather to view the event off the coast of Flamborough Head. Fire is consuming both ships, cannons and muskets are firing frantically, and there's two surgeons working tirelessly, covered in blood from the wounded. The captain of the Serapis yells out, "Have you struck? Do you call quarters?" And the captain of the Bonamy Richard responds with, "I have not yet begun to fight." That captain is John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones. No, wait, not that guy, but God, I wish Tasha loved him. Okay, we're getting warmer. There we go. Yes, this guy. He was an angry 5'6" Scotsman who managed to gain the title of the father of the American Navy. So, if you're looking for someone to blame for, well, this, then you should probably blame this handsome little fella right here. John Paul Jones, or for now just John Paul, was born in Scotland on July 6, 1747. His dad, John Paul Sr., was a gardener for the Arbigland estate, and he was very anal about symmetry. So much so that at one point he caught some guy stealing fruit and locked him up in one of the two summer houses and put little John Paul in the other, and he said it was simply for the sake of symmetry. John Paul Jr. took after his dad's overwhelming OCD, but in the form of perfecting his seamanship. Little John Paul Jr. fell in love with the Navy at a young age and could be seen yelling orders at his friends while they rode around on boats in the harbor. And whenever he turned 13, he finally got his chance to join a crew. Now remember, some ships are made of wood and some ships are made of steel, but the best ship is friendship, which was the name of the first ship John Paul Jr. signed on to. He signed on as an apprentice because only really cool people with connections can get the larger roles. But with some elbow grease and dedication, John Paul could work his way up to ordinary seaman level by the time he was 20. The friendship, however, was eventually sold after 3 years, and John Paul found a job on a slave ship for another 4, which he quit because he thought it was a quote-unquote disgusting practice. Good take, John Paul. Good take. But at the ripe age of 20, John Paul finally got his chance to become a captain. After he was paid off in Kingston, Jamaica, John Paul was unemployed, but he ran into the captain of the John that offered to take him back to this one again. On this trip, both the captain and the first mate both died, and John Paul happened to be the only person that could navigate the ship. So, when he finally got back to port, he was rewarded with command of the John. John Paul had worked his way up from servant to captain of his own ship with his own name. He then beat the hell out of some noble guy with a cat o' nine tails for not doing his chores, went to Admiralty Court in Tobago, went back to Kirkcudbright, got arrested because the guy apparently died on his way back, but luckily the charges were dismissed. John Paul was a little embarrassed after this, but he moved on to become the captain of the Betsy, where a guy he called the ringleader planned a mutiny on John Paul, and John Paul turned him into a bit of a kebab by accident. It was an accident. This time, John Paul chose to run because he wouldn't be facing a wimpy Admiralty Court. He was going to have to go to a normal jury. And now, we can call him by the name we remember him as, John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones left for America, specifically Virginia, in 1774, where everything was great and there was no talks of war with the world superpower that Jones was trying to hide from. Everything was perfect. While he was there, though, Jones made some friends with the Freemasons. It was a good way to gain connections if you weren't exactly blue-blooded. He then shot his shot with the Virginia governor's daughter, Dorothy Dandridge. But there was a guy named Patrick Henry who won the Battle of Love. And if this guy sounds familiar, he's the give me liberty or give me death guy. So, yeah. Sorry, Jones, you didn't stand a chance, buddy. By now, the American Revolution was underway, and Jones got recommended command of a ship called the Providence. But he declined because he just didn't like the cut of its jib. He instead became first lieutenant of the Alfred and set off for New Providence Island, where Continental Marines were sent on shore for the first time in history. It was a glorious battle where the Marines did the unthinkable. They just kind of walked up and the defenders kind of quit. Nevertheless, a win is a win, and Jones went back to the continent, where he was offered command of the Providence yet again, but this time he took the job. And on his second voyage out with a new ship and a new crew, he would experience his first naval combat. His officers spotted 5 ships on the horizon, and they assumed they were merchant ships with some good old loot. It was like taking candy from a baby, except that baby turned out to be a 26-gun British frigate. Jones immediately pulled a Huey and tried to escape, but the British frigate flew up an American flag and tried to deceive Jones. He didn't fall for it, of course, and when they came within musket shot, Jones ordered a quick change in direction and utilized his smaller ship's speed and escaped with no damage. A small scuffle, yes, but it gave valuable experience for Jones for his next battle that would place him directly in harm's way. Before that, though, Jones made another trip commanding the Alfred and the Providence and took some deserted soldiers from a privateer. Went back to Boston and was almost arrested again because of that privateer being mad that his crew was stolen. The arrest went something like this. Hey, you're under arrest. I will stab you. He's a king's officer. Wait, what? Then I will double stab you. I'm not a king's officer. Don't be modest. Go on, go get him. The devil? Don't you see his poker? But nothing really came of this. I just thought it was funny. John Paul Jones then got command of a ship called the Ranger and sailed to France and tried out one of his, what he called, schemes, which was to invade the British coast, something that hadn't been done since the Vikings around 700 years before. But Jones almost got arrested again in France because apparently he wasn't subscribed to Jacobite on all platforms, which is punishable by death, so stay safe out there, you guys. Just hit that button real fast. Alright, now back to the story. Jones sailed to Whitehaven. His scheme was to go on shore, spike the guns, burn 200 ships, and escape. Simple, right? Well, it's a bit harder if your crew is absolutely wasted. When they got to shore, Jones took half of his men to go spike the cannons, but a few of them got a little carried away and went to go steal some booze from a bar. The other half was supposed to burn the ships, but when Jones got back from spiking the guns, they kind of were just twiddling their fingers around and were a little embarrassed because their lantern ran out. So Jones was pissed and ended up breaking into a house, stole a candle, and was able to catch one of the 200 ships on fire before they escaped. Jones and his crew then went to go kidnap Lord Selkirk, but he wasn't home, so they settled on taking this cool little silver plate. They then sailed to Carrickfergus Harbor, where they challenged a British sloop of war, the Drake. Jones had tricked his enemy into thinking the Ranger was a British merchant ship, flying their flag and not revealing their guns until they managed to capture a scouting force. Jones then led the Drake out of the harbor for battle. At this time, no American ship had ever beaten a Royal Navy ship of comparable size. So, the Drake's crew had already brought out a casket of rum to celebrate their soon-to-be victory. But Jones had other ideas. The Ranger swung around to face the Drake's undefended bow and fired a broadside of grape shot. The Drake returned fire and smashed Jones's cabin. Jones stood on the quarterdeck without flinching as destruction happened all around him. Jones definitely wanted to win, but he didn't want to sink the ship. He wanted it as a trophy. And after an hour of broadsides, the Drake called for quarters. Word of John Paul Jones was spreading across Great Britain, and by now they had given him the name Pirate Jones. Fear set into the citizens who never really expected to worry about their home front. But Jones had one more scheme to spook them even more. The scheme that cemented John Paul Jones's name into history.